Would you be able to endure humiliations without saying a word? Could you listen to things, go through various humiliations, and still remain silent and confident that God will change the situation? What would you do in such situations? Strong and faithful woman. The Bible is full of stories of women of faith who changed generations. Even humiliated for a long time, Hannah endured these humiliations in silence and, in a wise manner, experienced mysteries that I will reveal here. Do you think you know the story of Hannah, the mother of the prophet Samuel? I bet it's not quite like that. Most people believe her story is just about suffering and waiting, but there is much more to it than that. Today, I will reveal real secrets from Hannah's life that will show you how to achieve your greatest blessings. If you stay with me until the end, you will hear details that could transform your life perspective and, even better, change the state of your life in all areas. Interested? Then comment now. I receive the blessings that God is giving me now. Comment this phrase. I receive the blessings that God is giving me now. And when I see your comment, I'll give it a heart because I know you will achieve this result soon. Now that you have commented, let's continue. Imagine living in a time where personal suffering was a constant mark and humiliations were accepted as part of life. This was the scenario in Hannah's time, an era marked by patriarchal culture and ancient traditions of Israel. Hannah lived in a society where a woman's value was often measured by her ability to bear children. Without children, a woman was seen as cursed or unfavored by God. This was the burden Hannah carried, and the social pressure was immense. But there is much more behind this story than you might imagine. In those times, the nation of Israel was in a period of transition and turmoil. After the conquest of the Promised Land, the people lived in a tribal structure without a strong central government. The judges were temporary leaders who arose in times of crisis to deliver and guide Israel, but the lack of constant leadership caused disorder and insecurity. This was a period where everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Judges 21:25. And faith and obedience to God were often sidelined. The religiosity of the people of Israel was weakened, and spiritual values were often forgotten. Imagine a place where going to the temple was not just a religious practice, but a vital necessity for the soul. The city of Shiloh, where Hannah and her husband Elkanah went annually, was the spiritual center of Israel at that time. The tabernacle of God was there, and it was believed to be the place where the divine presence dwelled among men. The pilgrimages to the temple were moments of intense devotion, but also of deep sadness for Hannah. Each trip to Shiloh was a painful reminder of her barrenness, especially under the provocations of Peninnah, Elkanah's other wife, who had children and made a point of humiliating Hannah. Within this complex family dynamic, Hannah's pain was exacerbated by cultural norms that favored those who could meet procreation expectations. Polygamy was a common practice, and rivalry between wives often led to intense personal conflicts. Peninnah, having children, held a more favored position within the family, while Hannah, without children, was looked upon with disdain. However, it is crucial to understand that Hannah was not just a passive victim of these circumstances. Her silent and faithful response to adversity would shape the history of Israel in an unexpected way. And then, amidst this scenario of hopelessness and oppression, emerges the figure of Hannah, a woman whose story is not just of suffering, but of extraordinary faith and resilience. Her determination to seek God, even when everything seemed lost, defies the logic of her time. Hannah's narrative is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest situations, faith can pave the way for miracles. When Hannah finally poured out her heart before God in the temple, it was not just an act of desperation, but of deep conviction that God would hear her pleas. And this unshakable faith not only transformed her life, but changed the course of an entire nation's history. Imagine the scene. a home divided by silent rivalries, where every shared meal is an emotional battle. Hannah, Elkanah's beloved wife, lives under the same roof as Peninnah, the other wife, who, unlike Hannah, has children. Peninnah never misses an opportunity to make Hannah feel her inferiority. With each birth, each child's smile, each small gesture of motherhood, Peninnah casts looks and words laden with venom. Still no children. What a pity. These comments were not just words. They were poisoned arrows that penetrated deeply into Hannah's heart. This constant humiliation affected Hannah in ways beyond the psychological. In a society where motherhood was seen as a woman's main achievement, Hannah's barrenness made her an outcast, an incomplete woman in the eyes of others. The emotional pain was exacerbated each year during the pilgrimage to the temple in Shiloh. While others celebrated and offered sacrifices in gratitude for received blessings, Hannah felt like an imposter, a woman whose presence in the temple seemed an affront. Peninnah, aware of this, intensified her provocations during this sacred period, turning Hannah's act of worship into a ritual of pain. The constant humiliation not only wounded Hannah's heart, but also tested her faith in unimaginable ways. Each insult from Peninnah was a blow that threatened to shatter her confidence in God. Hannah could have succumbed to bitterness, anger, or despair, but she chose a different path. She maintained a resolute silence, a posture of dignity that defied Peninnah's cruelty. Instead of retaliating with words or actions, Hannah internalized her pain and transformed it into a silent cry to God. This silence was her form of resistance, a silent scream of faith and hope. Inside, Hannah was at war. Her soul was shattered, and each insult from Peninnah was a cruel reminder of her own impotence. Yet, it was in this abyss of despair that Hannah found a surprising strength. She did not allow bitterness to take over her heart. Instead, she used her pain as fuel for a prayer that would echo through the ages. When Hannah finally knelt in the temple and poured out her soul before God, it was not just a plea for a child, it was a cry for redemption, a request for dignity, a desperate search for hope. And then something extraordinary happened. Hannah's prayer was not just heard, it was answered in a miraculous way. God not only gave her a son, Samuel, but also restored her in a way that defied all human logic. The woman who was ridiculed and despised became the mother of one of the greatest prophets of Israel. Hannah's story is a powerful testament that faith can transform humiliation into victory, and that even in the most desperate situations, there is always a path of hope. Peninnah may have had her moments of triumph, but the eternal story belongs to Hannah, the woman of unwavering faith. Imagine living every day under the weight of constant humiliation, where every glance and every word around you seems like a silent accusation. For Hannah, this was the daily reality, and yet instead of letting this pain consume her, she chose to transform her suffering into an invisible and powerful force. Instead of turning away from God, as many might do, Hannah drew closer, seeking comfort and hope in divine promises. Her faith, far from being shaken, became a beacon amidst the darkness. Hannah attended the temple at Shiloh, not as a ritual obligation, but as a spiritual refuge. Each visit, she poured out her soul before God with a sincerity and intensity that deeply touched. In one of those moments of prayer, Hannah made a bold and unreserved vow. If God gave her a son, she would dedicate him to divine service for his entire life. This promise was not a mere act of desperation, but a manifestation of her unshakable confidence that God not only heard her, but also had a greater plan for her life. Hannah transformed her suffering into a sacred covenant with the Creator. The contrast between Hannah and Peninnah was striking. While Peninnah used her blessings to humiliate and belittle, Hannah chose the path of humility and total surrender. Peninnah may have had children, but it was Hannah who demonstrated true spiritual motherhood, nurturing her faith with the same dedication a mother gives to her child. In every tear Hannah shed at the temple, there was a blend of pain and hope, a belief that her story would not end in suffering. She believed that God had a greater purpose, even if that purpose was not yet clear. Hannah's unwavering faith did not go unnoticed. The priest Eli, upon seeing Hannah praying fervently, initially mistook her for a drunk woman. However, upon understanding the depth of her anguish and devotion, Eli blessed her, asking God to grant her desire. This moment was a turning point, a divine confirmation that her pleas were being heard. Hannah left the temple with renewed peace, not because her situation had changed immediately, but because her faith gave her the assurance that God was working on her behalf. And then, the miracle happened. Hannah conceived and gave birth to Samuel, one of the greatest prophets of Israel. But the real miracle was the transformation that occurred within her. The woman who had been a figure of suffering became a symbol of faith and hope. Hannah not only received the blessing she so desired, but also showed the world that true strength comes from unwavering trust in God, even in the most adverse circumstances. Her story is a powerful testimony that faith can not only sustain, but also transform lives in ways that surpass our understanding. In her deepest pain, Hannah went to the temple at Shiloh with an intensity that transcended the common ritual of prayer. There, kneeling before the altar, she did not speak common words. Her prayer was a silent cry, a torrent of emotions bursting from the depths of her soul. Her lips moved without sound, but her heart cried out loudly. Every tear that fell from her face was an offering of her pain, a symbol of her anguish transformed into faith. Hannah was not just praying, she was pouring herself out before God with a sincerity and fervor rarely seen. In that moment of absolute vulnerability, Hannah made a bold vow to the Lord. She promised that if God granted her a son, she would dedicate him entirely to divine service for all the days of his life. This was not a simple request or desperate bargain, it was a complete and unreserved surrender. Hannah offered to God what she desired most, showing a deep trust in his promises and his power to transform lives. It was as if Hannah was saying, "Lord, my life is in your hands, and I trust completely in your plans, even though I do not yet understand them." As Hannah poured out her heart in the temple, her words were filled with a mix of pain and hope. She knew she was before the only one who could truly understand the depth of her suffering and respond to her pleas. Her prayer was not merely a request for a child, but a cry for redemption, a search for purpose, and a demonstration of unwavering faith. Every word she murmured was an expression of her anguished soul, but also of her unshakable faith. At that moment, Hannah was closer to God than she had ever been. The priest Eli, observing Hannah, initially misunderstood her, thinking she was drunk. But upon realizing the true nature of her devotion, Eli blessed her, saying that God would grant her heart's desire. This divine recognition from the priest reinforced Hannah's faith. She left the temple with renewed peace, a feeling that God had not only heard her pleas, but was already acting in her life. Eli's blessing was the confirmation Hannah needed to believe that her prayer was not in vain. And then, the miracle happened. Hannah conceived and gave birth to Samuel, a name meaning heard by God. The woman who entered the temple with a heavy heart and a broken soul left as a living witness to the power of prayer and God's faithfulness. But Hannah's true testimony was not just the birth of Samuel, but how she kept her vow, dedicating her son to divine service as promised. Her fervent prayer and vow to God not only changed her life, but also influenced the destiny of a nation. Hannah's story is a powerful proof that total surrender and trust in the Lord can bring miracles that echo through the ages. Hannah left the temple with a renewed sense of peace, but the true test of her faith was yet to come. Months later, God answered her fervent prayer in a miraculous way. Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son, whom she named Samuel, meaning heard by God. Imagine the indescribable joy she must have felt holding her son in her arms, knowing he was the divine answer to her tears and pleas. The woman who was once known for her sadness and pain was now blessed with immense joy and a living proof of God's faithfulness. However, Hannah's journey did not end with Samuel's birth. Instead, she remembered her promise to God and kept her word with impressive dedication. When Samuel was still a young child, Hannah made the courageous decision to take her precious son back to the temple at Shiloh to dedicate him to the Lord's service. This decision was not easy. Giving up the child she had so deeply desired and prayed for required a level of faith and commitment rarely seen. Hannah knew that Samuel was not just her child, but a divine gift that needed to be returned to God. Samuel's dedication to God's service marked a powerful and symbolic moment. Hannah entrusted her son to the priest Eli, trusting that God would care for Samuel and guide him on his path. This act of absolute devotion was not just a fulfillment of a promise, but also a public demonstration of faith and gratitude. Hannah visited Samuel annually, bringing him a small robe made with love, a constant reminder of her presence and her fulfilled promise. Samuel's dedication became a lasting testament to the power of prayer and Hannah's unwavering faith. Hannah and Samuel's story teaches us a vital lesson about the importance of maintaining faith even in the most difficult situations. Hannah could have easily been consumed by bitterness and despair, but she chose to trust in God and seek His help with all her heart. Her life is a reminder that even when circumstances seem insurmountable, faith can open doors to unimaginable miracles. God's response to Hannah's prayer not only changed her life, but also impacted an entire nation, as Samuel became one of Israel's greatest prophets, guiding the people with wisdom and justice. Hannah's commitment to her faith is an inspiration to us all. Her story shows that when we maintain our trust in God and keep our promises, even the most difficult challenges can be transformed into glorious victories. Samuel's life, dedicated to God's service from childhood, is a living testament to the influence of a faithful and devoted mother. Hannah's journey, from humiliation to exaltation, is proof that God honors those who seek Him with sincerity and perseverance. Her story encourages us to keep our faith, knowing that God always hears our prayers and has a greater plan for our lives. Hannah's patience and resilience are powerful testimonies of how faith can sustain someone through the toughest storms of life. For years, Hannah endured the pain of infertility and the constant provocations of Peninnah, her rival. Each day was a silent struggle, each tear an unspoken prayer. Hannah did not allow bitterness to dominate her heart. Instead, she persevered, firmly believing that God had a plan for her. This unwavering faith and determination to patiently wait for God's timing are profound lessons for all of us. Hannah's total surrender to God is one of the most inspiring aspects of her story. She did not only ask for a child, but committed to returning that child to God as an act of gratitude and devotion. When Samuel was born, Hannah fulfilled her promise without hesitation, taking him to the temple to be raised in the Lord's service. This act of total surrender was not just a fulfillment of a vow, but a demonstration of absolute trust that God knew what was best. Hannah did not only trust God to give her a child, but also trusted that He would take better care of Samuel than she could. Hannah also teaches us that God always has a plan, even when everything seems lost. In moments of desperation, when it seemed like her prayers would not be answered, Hannah maintained her faith. She believed that God had a greater purpose for her life, even though she could not see the way ahead. Her resilience and patience were rewarded when God finally answered her pleas in a way that exceeded all her expectations. Samuel was not just a child to Hannah. He was a tool for God to guide and transform Israel. Hannah's life is a living testimony that patience and resilience are essential to see God's promises fulfilled. In a world where we seek quick answers and immediate solutions, Hannah's story reminds us of the importance of waiting for God's perfect timing. Her patience was a reflection of her trust in divine sovereignty, and her resilience was a demonstration of her unshakable faith. Hannah shows us that even when facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, faith and patience can lead us to experience miracles that transform lives. Finally, Hannah's story teaches us about the beauty of total surrender to God and trust in His plans, even when we do not understand what is happening. Hannah surrendered not only her deepest desire, but also her son, trusting that God had a greater purpose. This complete surrender and unwavering trust are what make her story so powerful and inspiring. Hannah's journey from suffering to joy is a reminder that God sees our tears, hears our prayers, and has a perfect plan for each of us. Her patience and resilience paved the way for the fulfillment of God's promises, showing us that true faith waits, trusts, and believes, even in the most difficult circumstances. Before we end, I want to share a powerful piece of advice from God with you. Keep your faith unshakable, even in the toughest situations. I'll repeat, keep your faith unshakable, even in the toughest situations. Believe that God has a plan, trust in His timing, and stand firm because He always fulfills His promises. Once again, keep your faith unshakable, even in the toughest situations. On my YouTube channel, I focus on three main things: educating, inspiring, and elevating others to draw closer to Jesus, our Lord and Savior. My goal is to be a resource for your spiritual journey and help you discover and deepen your faith. And for those of you who have watched until now, please comment, "I watched until the end." Just comment that. When I see this comment, I'll give it a heart, because I know I've added value to you, and I'll be even more motivated to always bring you high-quality content. Now, a powerful video that is a continuation of this one is showing up on your screen. It is filled with riches, secrets about God, biblical treasures, and much more that will accelerate your results in all areas. Click on that video. Do it now.